Thanks so much for being with us this evening.
Great to be with you.
Cheers. What do you make of these domino prime ministers falling straight into Hamas's basically only media strategy, which is use the suffering of those that we are creating, use it to win the hearts and minds of the West by merely pointing the finger straight at Israel, even though we're the very cause for it?
Yeah, I think you put your finger on it. That's exactly what Hamas do. Hamas targeted innocent civilians in Israel on October the 7th. And it's a pretty unique terror organization, Hamas, or an unusual one, because yes, it then wishes to use any innocent civilians in Gaza as collateral to their, or indeed the main attack point for their war. No other. I can't think of an army that has behaved like this in history, which is one of the reasons why Hamas is not an army. It's a terror group. It literally puts civilians in front of its own terrorists. It literally puts civilian buildings above its own terrorist infrastructure, its weapons storage units, its missile storage, and indeed its leaders. This is a sort of cowardly way in which Hamas acts. But as for the Australian government, I think it's been a lamentable episode. Immediately after October 7th, the Australian government said that they would stand staunchly beside Israel and for civilized values. We then see the first vote at the UN, and the Australian government quite rightly doesn't vote for this ceasefire because it doesn't condemn Hamas. And then exactly the same motion comes back a little while later at the UN, and the Australian government goes with it. It shows a terrible lack of leadership. But I would add one other thing. It shows that the current Australian government is very easily swayed. It shows that you just have to have, in this case, like one Muslim minister who breaks ranks and should have been fired for breaking ranks and not having collective responsibility, but breaks ranks and is then not fired, and instead the government adapts to his point of view. You have that, and then you have the fact that, some thousands of Australian Hamas supporters and weirdo leftist activists turn out on the streets of Australian cities, like in other Western cities. The fact that these people turn out seems to have done a great deal to persuade the Australian government. Well, I would have a warning for them, which is watch out, because other people will get in on that trick. When people scent the blood in the water, scent that you're this easily swayed and influenced, my goodness, other people are going to be coming at you as well.
I don't think there's many Australians who would disagree that we have an incredibly weak government. And I've said from the very beginning, this Prime Minister has always been pro-Palestinian. You can watch videos of him with very youthful looks, talking very passionately for the pro-Palestinian cause. On to other news.
Douglas Murray, once again, making a great point there. And there's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard it before, give them an inch, they'll take a mile. Well, in this case in Australia, and maybe in other governments as well, give them an inch, they'll take over your country. Because what Douglas is basically saying is when you kowtow to these special interest groups, to this intersectionality, you in essence are basically acquiescing everything to them. You're basically saying, okay, you know what? If you start to cry, if you start to shout, if you start to protest, we'll give in each and every single time. And it doesn't have to be that you give it up immediately, everything. But you start giving up small, tiny little pieces. Those pieces add up very quickly. And then other groups start to smell that there's blood in the waters. And they start circling like sharks. And they want their piece as well. They want to be heard. They want their demands to be met. And you've got and basically what ends up happening is you have a tyranny of the minority. Anyways, let's get to some more of what Douglas Murray thinks about. I guess the next clip is coming up about what he thinks is happening with the Hunter Biden story and the coverage of the House of Representatives in the hearings into Hunter Biden and his laptop. We'll get to that in just a few seconds, but before we do, I just want to let you know you're watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I'm your host, Dr. Nasser. where I give you my political perspective, my political prescription of what happens when you get social media, culture, religion, science, politics, and they all come crashing together. Let's get to that video clip right now.
Thoughts on the US House of Reps has, of course, voted on Wednesday to launch an impeachment inquiry into President Joe Biden to examine whether he improperly benefited from his son's Hunter's foreign business dealings. I mean, Reuters says they've done this even though they have yet to find evidence of wrongdoing. That seems to be straight out of the Dems playbook. But is this Christmas come early or what, Douglas? Obviously, we've got the bank reports, we've got Devon Archer, Hunter's former business partner's testimony. We know that there's no evidence. Are you hopeful this inquiry will at last reveal the extent of that family's corruption?
Well, I'm hopeful that it could try to get a bit closer to the truth. Hunter Biden gave a press conference this week in which he said, you know, I'm here. People say, where's Hunter? Well, I'm here. And you think, yeah, like 6 years after everyone was asking, 5 years, 3 years. I mean, it's remarkable thing to sort of present himself as having been always open for questioning and always keen to answer any press queries or indeed legal queries. He's done exactly the opposite. And he did he did a very interesting move, which was that perhaps the inevitable one, doubtless, PR'd to death beforehand. But he appealed to the sort of sympathies of the public. He kept referring to the fact that his life had been in disarray, that he referred to his brother, he referred to his father, he talked about his addiction problems and all that, and indeed that his life had been in disarray because of his addiction problems around the time some of the allegations happened. Now, this is a very interesting thing, of course, because he does play to, in America, you've always got a kind of 50-50 political divide. There will be some people who will look at that and will say, poor Hunter, everyone's sympathetic to people with addictions and people who've wrecked their lives in some way, which he certainly has, albeit in a very privileged way. There will be some people who look at that and actually feel sorry for him and think, yeah, kind of lay off. I mean, it's true that, as he said, it's embarrassing for him. Naked photos of himself have gone all around the world. They've been held up in the house. But just calling for pity or sympathy doesn't seem to me to be really enough, because Hunter Biden still has serious questions to answer about his business dealings. He talked about how proud he was to have been on the board of several companies. But he didn't say why he was on the board of those companies or what he brought to them or what his work was or indeed what the family cut was. We know from some of the leaked emails that were on the laptop that there were kickbacks within the family. So he can have our sympathy, but only after he's been frank and full and honest about what actually went on. And I think a lot of people realize he just hasn't been. The family haven't been. Everyone else can see the influence peddling operation that seems to have been going on, which is, I have to say, endemic within American politics. But I think that he can only get the kind of sympathy he wants if he's also frank, and that seems to be a million miles away at the moment.
He seems to be taking his best stab at it, though, doesn't he? Like, look at me being authentic. I'm here. I'm ready to talk. God help us. Sorry.
And then he didn't, of course.
Yes, and then he didn't
answer questions, then didn't.
Of course. I can't wait for this inquiry. As we know, it'll have far greater reaching powers to demand what people need to see, hence the point of an impeachment inquiry. Douglas Murray, thank you.
When Douglas Murray talks about influence peddling and how that's endemic within American politics, I would just like to say that it's not only is it endemic, it's an epidemic. It is a form of legalized bribery, and we're talking about the lobbyists, but this isn't law. I mean, this is, I guess you could say this is the Chinese government and other governments that are lobbying on the behalf of their interests, but they're doing it in such a way where we're talking about money that is changing hands for nothing more than influence and access. And that's the difference, folks. That's the freaking difference. If this was you and I doing something like this, it would be another tier of justice where we would be the ones that would be walked handcuffed behind our backs, having SWAT or FBI agents, in the middle of the night or early in the morning, raiding our homes, dragging us out of our homes in front of our family and children, and taken off to jail, and basically then slapped with of a whole host of basically just things that we've done wrong, indictments, and then we'd be sent off to jail. But because it's Hunter Biden and the privilege of the Biden family, because of the presidency, because he was a senator, because he's his son, Hunter basically gets to get off scot-free. And we don't know if that's going to be happening or whatever, but they're going to water down these indictments, and they're going to minimize them as much as possible. And then they're probably going to go ahead and maybe even with time served or a very minimal amount of time. But is that true justice that's going to come out of this? The only thing we can hope for is that at least people will say, well, you know what? Some of it, if not all of it, was true. And we know that the American system of justice is basically balanced in the favor of the rich and the people who know how to work the system, and the elites, and in the establishment. Look what happened with the Clintons. Hillary, you and I do the same thing she did. Oh my goodness, we're toast, baby. We're toast in the American justice system. We're locked away, and no one's going to ever find the keys. Anyways, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I've been your host, Dr. Nasser. If you haven't done so already and we've earned your subscription, we certainly would appreciate you to subscribe to our channel. Like, share, and follow us. You know what to do. Check out our other video links above and below. I'll leave you with my final thought, which is, when you're right, you're right. And when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.